Tonight I want to go back 2,000 years, if that's okay with you, but try to bring it home to you and give you the feeling that that there were real people struggling about real things then, which are very relevant still. I mean, you know, when you think about ancient Rome, what's our image? Hollywood, right? These guys walking around in togas and making pronouncements in stentorian tones and asking how the emperor is feeling and all that. I'm going to talk about a period before all those emperors. It's the period known as the Late Republic. It goes roughly from about 133 BC to, I would say, 44 BC, which is when Caesar was assassinated. So roughly, with more emphasis on the latter part of that period. I want to say something about history first, because our images of the past are created largely by history's winners. The voices of the losers are muted, or if they come to us, they're through very carefully tuned filters. And I agree with Catherine Morland. She said, quote, "It's rather odd that history should be so dull, since a great deal of it must be invention." The struggle to lay claim to the labor, the land, and the wealth of society, which is so much the motive force of history, that struggle is called class struggle. And it carries over into the writing of history itself. The writing of history has long been a privileged calling undertaken within the church, the royal court, the affluent townhouse, the government agency, the university, and the corporate-funded foundation. The powers that be not only try to control events, but they try to control our memory and understanding of these events, which is part of controlling the events themselves. The social context in which history is written greatly influences the commodity that's produced and distributed. Edward Gibbon, the author of that monumental work, The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, back in the late 18th century, was himself perfectly aware of the class realities behind the writing of history. Can everybody hear me okay? Is anybody having any trouble? Is there no echo or anything? Okay. He talked about how history had to be written by gentlemen. Isn't that interesting? Gentlemen who had the means, the leisure to pursue such a calling. In his words, wretched would be the work of those whose scholarly efforts, whose daily efforts are stimulated by daily hunger. Gibbon himself produced what I would call gentleman's history, a genre heavily imbued with an upper-class ideological perspective. Antiquity, all through antiquity, going back to those early times, gives us numerous gentleman historians with a ruling class or upper class perspective and prejudice. Homer, Herodotus, Thucydides, Polybius, Cicero, Livy, Plutarch, Suetonius, Appian, Josephus, Tacitus. Those are the ones I've read. Almost all of whom had a rather low opinion of the common people. Maybe Plutarch is an exception. I will partially exempt him. He sometimes is capable of a halfway sensitive comment about them. Gibbon was a member of Parliament. He was a firm supporter of the British Empire. He voted against extending liberties to the American colonials. He hated and abhorred, was horrified by the egalitarianism of the French Revolution. This Gibbon had no difficulty conjuring the fairy tale pastoral image of the Roman Empire, where all the vanquished nations blended into one great people. This is a paraphrase of Gibbon. With no desire to regain their independence, enjoying the benefits of Rome's rule, directed by both absolute power, virtue, and wisdom. I mean, rarely do we hear about an empire built upon sacked towns, burned crops, shattered armies, enslaved prisoners, mercilessly impoverished and overtaxed populations. One eminent 20th century British historian, Cyril Robinson, offers the familiar and fanciful notion of an empire achieved stochastically. Stochasticism is the theory that all things happen by chance, without deliberate intent by the actors above, without conscious design. I quote Robinson, "It was perhaps almost as true of Rome as of Great Britain that she acquired her world domination in a fit of absence of mind." Yeah, right. Again, a fairy tale image. An imperialism without imperialists. Isn't that remarkable? Well, what do you have, a conspiracy theory? You think they actually built this empire? Planned and went out and did things and calculated and raised armies and decided that was a profitable area to conquer? You think they actually thought about that? It was absent-minded. It just kind of, they got up and said, let's see, who are we going to fight today? What are we going to do today? And that theme, by the way, is very familiar to us. We hear that the United States, for half a century, I have heard the United States was thrusted onto the world arena, reluctantly had to assume the role of world leader to meet the challenges of the 20th century. We're never told who did the thrusting, for whose interests, at what cost to the people at home and abroad, nor why it still remains such an imperative, even without the bugaboo of world communist conspiracy, to use as an excuse. Along with his class bias, the gentleman historian is likely to be a male supremacist. Surprised? Anybody surprised here? Gibbon, for instance, Gibbon describes one emperor's wife as, quote, "united to a lively imagination, a firmness of mind and strength of judgment seldom bestowed on her sex." Usually left unnoticed was the plight of ordinary Roman women who tended to die younger than their male counterparts because of childbirth, exhaustion, mistreatment, and undernourishment. Women who usually lived under the rule of some male, be it the paterfamilias, the husband, or the guardian, and who were expected to defer to the male while remaining decorous, chaste, and of sweet disposition. Surely this is something familiar about that, isn't there? In recent decades, by the way, there's been an emergence of some feminist scholarship, and the study of Roman women has improved somewhat. Some gentlemen historians let slip a noticeable ethnic bigotry or ethno-class bigotry. Cyril Robinson asserts that, quote, "the purity of Roman blood began to be contaminated by proletarians of Greek and Oriental origin, persons of feeble character incapable of assimilating the national habits of decency and restraint. Although not all Greeks, of course, were vicious or unwholesome characters." It's always nice when the bigot tries to smuggle in his bigotry under a balanced kind of statement, moderated, qualified, you know. Some of my best friends, right, are feeble and incapable characters. The great Theodore Mommsen, you know, who, remember Mark Twain's description of that enthusiastic reception that Mommsen got when Twain was visiting in Germany, and whom we might have expected better. Mommsen scornfully describes the Roman Forum, the great open-air assemblage, as a shouting fest for everyone in the shape of a man, Egyptians and Jews, street boys and slaves, freedmen and Greeks. It gets better, or I should say worse. Jerome Carcopino, another eminent classicist, writes that interbreeding between Roman aristocrats and their female slaves or freedwomen created a hybridization similar to that which has more recently contaminated other slave-owning peoples. It strongly accentuated the national and social decomposition of Rome, unquote. No segregationist or Nazi blood theorist could have said it better. These are all reputable historians. The progenitor of all gentlemen historians of the late Republic, the fount, the source of all gentleman history of the late Republic, who himself was a major participant, Cicero, who has been worshipped